We must take responsibility for the impact our energy is having.
On?
Everything. Each other. This belief that I'm here and you're there, which we're taught at infancy, is a delusion. You know, someone who awakens and realizes the deepest truth of who we are, realizes that this sense of self is just a persistent delusion that keeps arising, and I believe it. It's just simply not true. And it is the cause of endless suffering in my life, in your life, in the world. So taking responsibility for the impact everything, the whole of everything that I'm doing is having on others is a sign of maturity. And if I'm so concerned about being safe and being equal and being entitled and feeling good, I'm totally abdicating my responsibility.
So when you're working with someone, then you're acknowledging that there might be both systemic and personal, not only trauma, but also oppression happening. And one of the ways that you're offering a solution, if you will, is by showing that the self isn't real.
Of course, it's called Buddhism.
And I've heard that. And that there's this radical responsibility piece that
Yes.
doesn't negate those other truths.
It doesn't negate anything.
Right.
It actually enhances everything.
So that sounds pretty complex.
It's so simple. Radical responsibility.
Uh-huh.
It's terrifying to someone who identifies with being a victim or identifies with being a rescuer. So if I identify with rescuing victims,
Which there's a lot of in our culture, of course.
yeah. It's pretty prominent today, isn't it?
Yeah.
And now, being an aide, I actually identify with being a perpetrator, a troublemaker. So, of course, I'm singled out and attacked ruthlessly, which is okay. If it doesn't kill me, it makes me stronger. But, what I've had to find in order to have the wisdom to know whether to make room for someone or to challenge them with intensity, what I've had to find is my own internal perpetrator and my own internal victim. Places where I really have been victimized. And I had to dig really deep to find those. And I did find them. I did find them. And that enables me to have the degree of sensitivity that I can see the places that other people are falling into that victim overwhelm, and they're disappearing. And once I have the emotional sensitivity to recognize that, then I can help them. If I don't, I not only don't have the sensitivity to recognize when they've disappeared, so I keep pushing, I don't have the wisdom to help them. So this is me taking responsibility for my own victim, my own perpetrator, my own rescuer.
And so as we own those archetypes within ourselves, because so what you're saying is that if someone comes to you and they have a legitimate victim story, it's not that the story isn't real, it's that the story is much deeper than it appears to be.
Oh, yes. And it needs to be heard. When someone has a victim story that's activated, the archetype of the victim is activated. They're actually a sacrificial lamb. That truth needs to be spoken. They're carrying a tremendous amount of shame. Their volition and their agency, their ability to set boundaries and get angry and take a stand have been violated, and they have been victimized, and they've given up the power. This creates an incredible amount of shame because that anger can't get out and it needs to go somewhere. Where does it go?
In.
It goes in.
Internalized.
And it becomes self-loathing.
Right.
Violence towards self.
Right. And that's the idea of internalized oppression, in part.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a fancy way of saying it.
Yeah.
It really is me beating myself up unreasonably. And it's often kind of a preemptive strike to, if I beat myself up, then you don't have to beat me up. Right. And it keeps me in victim mode. And other people trying to rescue me just enhance that victim mode. They no longer can fulfill the identification with being a rescuer if I stop being a victim. So rather than teaching me how to take responsibility and learning affect regulation, learning to control my setting boundaries without getting angry, taking responsibility for the boundaries I need to set, I will remain in victim rather than taking responsibility.
And so, in other words, the way I hear that is saying that you'll be dependent on that rescuer rather than dependent on yourself.
Co-enabled.
Right. So it's a codependency.
It's a codependency.
Right. And that's happening, it seems, writ large in our culture, especially universities and places where they're really coddling
yes.
a victim in the sense of keeping them in the victim place.
Yeah.
Because I feel good if I get to rescue you. That's
exactly.
the other part. Right?
That's the payoff.
Right. Right.
I can be the hero.
I get to be virtuous and self-righteous and moral.
And pretend that I'm not perpetrating your victimhood.
Right.
Which I am.